If you're watching this, something already ended in your life and no one announced it. There was no breakdown, no dramatic collapse. Just a quiet moment where the old way of being stopped working. You didn't lose motivation. You didn't lose direction. You lost compatibility with who you used to be. This video is not here to teach you anything. It's here to explain why your old identity no longer responds, no matter how hard you try to return to it, because the shift didn't begin today. It already finished. And the reason this feels irreversible is simple. Only one version of you still exists now. Stay with me, because once you understand what actually happened, you'll stop trying to go back. Everything else has already been left behind. And finally recognize why you can set. The shift never announces itself. The most important changes in reality never arrive with noise. They don't warn you. They don't prepare you. They don't ask permission. A quantum shift does not knock on the door of your life and explain itself. It doesn't come as an event you can point to on a calendar. It happens silently, in the background, while you're still living as if nothing has changed. That's why most people miss it. The shift occurs before awareness catches up. By the time you start feeling something is different, the transition is already complete. The system does not inform you while it is happening. It informs you after the old structure can no longer be restored. Think about the moment you first noticed something was off. Not broken, not dramatic, just your reactions felt delayed. Your motivations felt hollow. The things that once pulled you forward suddenly felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else's life. That wasn't set confusion. That was the residue of a version of you that had already expired. A quantum shift does not replace your world all at once. It removes relevance first. You don't lose people immediately. You lose resonance with them. You don't lose desire. You lose attachment to outcomes. You don't lose direction. You lose tolerance for misalignment. That is how you know the shift has already happened. If it were happening now, you wouldn't be able to observe it. Awareness only arrives after the collapse of the old pattern. This is why waiting for a sign is useless. By the time a sign appears, the decision has already been made at a level deeper than thought. Silence ensures completion. The universe does not announce transformation because announcements invite resistance. You were not meant to prepare for this moment. Preparation belongs to intention. This belonged to inevitability. That's why there was no dramatic ending, no clear beginning. And once that realization arrives, there is nothing left to save from the past. Just a quiet sense that something you used to be no longer fits inside you. The shift does not need your agreement. It only needs you to notice that the old world stopped responding to you. That is not loss. That is confirmation. The moment you became aware of the change was not the beginning of the shift. It was the proof that it was already over. And that is why you can go back. 2. Discomfort is proof, not a problem. When the shift completes, the first thing people try to do is escape the discomfort. They assume something has gone wrong. It is the signal of recalibration. But discomfort is not the signal of failure. In quantum systems, instability always appears before coherence. When a system moves from one state to another, it passes through a phase where old rules no longer apply and new ones have not yet fully stabilized. Consciousness follows the same law. What you are feeling is not chaos. It is the absence of familiar structure. The discomfort doesn't come from pain. It comes from the loss of reference points. Your old habits no longer regulate you. Your old motivations no longer drive you. Your old fears no longer organize your decisions. That creates a gap, and the mind hates gaps. So it labels the experience as anxiety, confusion, or emptiness. But what it's really reacting to is freedom without instructions. After the shift, there is silence. Before the shift, life told you who to be, and silence feels unbearable to a mind trained on noise. You're not uncomfortable because something is missing. You're uncomfortable because nothing false is propping you up anymore. They seek familiar struggles. This is the stage where many people try to go back. They recreate old problems just to feel oriented again. But notice this carefully. Even when you try to return, it doesn't work. The old patterns feel forced. The old escapes feel empty. The old comforts feel like they belong to someone else. That's because discomfort is not asking to be fixed. It's asking to be allowed. It is shedding unnecessary scaffolding. The system is not broken. If you rush this phase, you fragment yourself. If you resist it, you exhaust yourself. But if you stay still long enough, something stabilizes on its own. Not excitement, not clarity, but groundedness. The discomfort fades not because you solved it, but because you stopped fighting it. And when that happens, you realize something crucial. The instability wasn't a flaw in the shift. It was the final proof that the shift succeeded. Because only someone who has left the old structure behind feels this kind of unfamiliar calm wrapped in unease. This phase doesn't mean you are lost. It means you're no longer being carried by habits that were never truly yours. And once the discomfort passes, there is no confusion waiting on the other side. Only alignment. And alignment doesn't announce itself either. 3. You didn't evolve, you were selected. There is a comforting idea people like to believe that everyone evolves at the same pace, that growth is simply a matter of time, effort, or intention. But reality doesn't work that way. In quantum systems, not every state continues forward. Some collapse, some repeat, and some transition. Selection is not personal, it is structural. The shift didn't move everyone forward. It filtered. Most people remain inside loops because repetition feels safe. Familiar suffering is easier to carry than unfamiliar clarity. So the system allows them to stay where they are. But a small number reach a point where repetition collapses. Not because they tried harder, but because they could no longer participate in patterns they clearly saw through. Awareness changes the rules. Once you recognize a pattern fully, you can no longer live inside it unconsciously. And when unconscious participation ends, the system has only 2 options: return you to denial or move you forward. You didn't evolve gradually into this version of yourself. You crossed a threshold. Before the shift, you could tolerate contradiction. After the shift, contradiction feels physically wrong. You didn't become better. You became incompatible with who you were. That incompatibility is what triggered selection. Selection does not reward virtue. It responds to coherence. The moment your inner perception stopped matching your outer life, the system had to resolve the tension. And resolution doesn't come from compromise, it comes from transition. This is why the shift feels unfair if you try to explain it logically. Why you can teach it. Why you can replicate it on demand. Because selection is not earned, it's recognized. You were not chosen because you wanted truth. You were chosen because you could survive it. They feel the discomfort. Many people sense the edge of this threshold, but they retreat. They choose distraction. They choose comfort. They choose noise. You didn't sit. And once that decision is made, consciously or not, the system doesn't offer return paths. That's why trying to explain your change to others feels impossible. They're not missing information. They're operating in a different state. This is not superiority. It's separation by readiness. And once selection occurs, identity becomes non-negotiable. You can delay integration. You can resist acceptance. But you cannot undo selection. Because from the system's perspective, the previous version of you is no longer viable. And that is why this shift doesn't feel like growth. It feels like arrival. And arrival does not ask for permission. 4. The past lost its power over you. One of the clearest signs the shift has completed is not what appeared in your life. It sets what quietly stopped controlling you. The past didn't disappear. It simply stopped having authority. Memories are still there, but they no longer pull you backward. Regrets still exist, but they don't demand correction. Old pain still has a shape, but it no longer defines your movement. That change is subtle, and that's why it's often misunderstood. People call it healing. They call it acceptance. They call it emotional maturity. But what actually happened is far more structural than emotional. The timeline that gave those experiences meaning closed. In quantum terms, information only exerts influence while the system continues to reference it. Once the reference collapses, the information remains, but its power dissolves. That is exactly what you sever experiencing. You don't relive the past because your current identity no longer requires it for orientation. The system is no longer drawing energy from old events to stabilize who you are now. This is why certain memories feel strangely distant, even though they once defined you. Not numb, just irrelevant. The mind may still bring them up, out of habit, but they don't land the same way. There is no emotional gravity. This is also why guilt has softened, why resentment feels unnecessary, why revenge no longer interests you. It's not that you forgave everything. It's that there is no one left who needs to forgive. The version of you that required resolution belonged to a different structure. That structure no longer organizes your behavior. Trying to force emotional closure now feels artificial, like rehearsing a script for a role you no longer play. That's because closure only matters inside a timeline that is still open. You didn't set closed chapters. The book ended. And here sits the part most people don't understand. When the past loses power, the future stops feeling urgent. You don't rush anymore. You don't chase redemption. You don't seek proof that things will work out. You're not detached because you don't care. You're detached because nothing is unresolved at the level that once drove you. This is why going back feels impossible. You didn't escape it. Not because you're afraid of the past, but because the past no longer recognizes you. You outlived it, and when a timeline ends, there is nothing inside it that can pull you home. That is not loss. That is completion. 5. Your identity is no longer negotiable. There was a time when your identity felt flexible. You could adapt. You could compromise. You could become what the moment required. But after the shift, something fundamental changed. That flexibility once kept you safe. You no longer choose who you are in each situation. You arrive already defined. This is why pretending feels exhausting now. Why small compromises feel heavy. Why playing roles drains you faster than effort ever did. Now, identity is something the system enforces. Before, identity was something you adjusted to survive. This isn't stubbornness. It's coherence. In quantum systems, once a state stabilizes, deviation requires enormous energy. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's inefficient. Your consciousness has reached a configuration that no longer tolerates distortion. That's why saying yes when you mean no feels physically wrong. Why silence feels better than false agreement. Why alignment feels non-negotiable, even when it costs you comfort. You're not becoming rigid. You're becoming precise. The world often mistakes this for ego, for inflexibility, for detachment. But ego demands recognition. This state doesn't test. You're not asserting who you are. You're simply unable to be what you're not. This is also why external validation lost its power. Approval doesn't land the same way. Praise doesn't inflate you. Criticism doesn't destabilize you. Not because you're above it, but because identity no longer depends on feedback. Your internal signal is stronger than external noise. This is the stage where many people feel misunderstood. They assume they need to explain themselves better. They don't tit. Misunderstanding happens when others are relating to a version of you that no longer exists. You didn't become difficult. You became consistent. This is why certain doors close without conflict, and consistency is uncomfortable for systems built on fluctuation. Why some connections dissolve quietly. Why your path narrows without effort. Identity doesn't expand here. It condenses. Less variation. And once identity stabilizes at this level, negotiation ends. More truth. Not because you refuse to bend, but because there is nothing left that can be bent without breaking alignment. This is not a phase. This is the structure you operate from now. And that is why going back isn't set an option. Not because you are unwilling, but because this version of you cannot pretend to be smaller. 6. The world feels slower because you are no longer out of sync. At first it feels like the world has lost momentum. People take longer to understand you. Conversations repeat themselves. Decisions that feel obvious to you take others endless time to reach. Or bored. It's tempting to think you've become impatient or detached. But what actually happened is far more precise. You stopped operating with internal delay. You didn't speed up. Before the shift, much of your energy was spent negotiating with yourself, second-guessing, overthinking, seeking reassurance. That internal friction slowed everything down. After the shift, that friction dissolved. Thought, intent, and action moved closer together. Less debate. It's less gap between knowing and doing. Less hesitation. This creates the illusion that the world slowed down, when in reality, you simply removed drag from your own system. Most people still live with constant internal latency. They process through fear, doubt, approval-seeking, and habit. Every decision passes through layers of interference. You don't set. That sets why conversations feel shallow. Not because people lack depth, but because they're still processing from positions you've already integrated. This difference in processing speed creates distance. Pauses feel longer now. You might notice it most in silence. Waiting feels unnecessary. You sense outcomes before explanations arrive. This is not superiority. It's synchronization. Your internal timing finally matches your perception. Quantum systems behave the same way. The system appears calm, even still, but it is functioning with extreme efficiency. When coherence increases, unnecessary oscillation disappears. That's what's happening to you. You speak less because words are no longer compensating for uncertainty. You move more deliberately because effort is no longer wasted. And this is why returning to old rhythms feels unbearable. Old routines feel inefficient. Old environments feel noisy. Old dynamics feel like static. Not because they were wrong, but because they're running on a clock you no longer use. This is also why urgency faded. You don't rush, because rushing belongs to misalignment. When direction is clear, speed becomes irrelevant. The world didn't lose momentum. You simply stopped wasting energy trying to keep up with what was never in sync with you to begin with. And once internal coherence is achieved, there is no reason and no mechanism to slow yourself down again. That pace is permanent. 7. Loneliness is not a failure. It is a transition state. That clarity is irreversible. And that is why going back would feel like moving through resistance you no longer need. One of the most misunderstood phases after the shift is loneliness. Not the emotional desperation people talk about. Not the dramatic kind. But a quiet, weightless isolation that doesn't hurt the way sadness does. It simply exists. You can be surrounded by people and still feel it. You can be loved and still feel it. That's because this loneliness is not the absence of connection. You can be busy and still feel it. It is the absence of resonance. Before the shift, connection came from shared identity, shared fears, shared ambitions. shared narratives about who you were becoming. After the shift, those reference points collapse. And when shared identity disappears, conversation continues, but meaning doesn't transfer. This is why interactions feel thinner now. Not wrong, just incomplete. You're not lonely because you lost people. You're lonely because the version of you they related to is no longer present. The system creates this isolation deliberately. If external signals remain too strong, the new structure cannot settle. So the noise fades. In every major transition, interference must be removed before stabilization can occur. Not all at once, not dramatically. People drift, invitations slow, conversations shorten, and for the first time, you are left alone with your awareness without mirrors. This is not punishment, this is calibration. Most people cannot tolerate this phase. They mistake silence for rejection and rush to fill it. They return to old relationships, old habits, old distractions, not because they want to, but because emptiness terrifies the mind. But emptiness here is not void. It is space. Space where identity stops reacting and starts consolidating. Notice something important. This loneliness does not feel desperate. It feels still. There is no craving to be understood, no urge to explain yourself, no impulse to perform. That's because the self is no longer negotiating its existence. You don't feel unseen. You feel unmirrored. And that distinction matters. This is also why forcing new connections during this phase feels wrong, artificial, draining. Not closed. Unavailable. Unavailable to relationships that require you to fragment yourself in order to belong. The system is protecting coherence. This phase continues until identity becomes self-referential, until you no longer need reflection to confirm who you are, not based on similarity. Only then do new connections appear, not based on shared wounds, but based on frequency alignment. That's why rushing this phase delays it. Loneliness here is not something to solve. It's something to outlast. Because once this transition completes, the loneliness disappears without effort, not replaced by crowds, not replaced by noise, replaced by quiet solidity. You don't feel isolated anymore, even when you're alone. And when connection returns, it arrives differently. Fewer people, less intensity, more precision, no confusion, just recognition, no performance. This is the final purification before integration. And once you pass through it fully, you realize something unsettling and freeing at the same time. You were never lonely. You were simply no longer compatible with relationships built for a version of you that no longer exists. And that is not something you fix. That is something you complete. Your intuition is operating ahead of thought. After the shift, something subtle but undeniable changes in the way you make decisions. You no longer think your way forward. You sense your way forward. Before, intuition was a background whisper. Now it arrives as a clear directive, often before logic has time to organize itself. This doesn't feel mystical. It feels efficient. You notice decisions forming instantly, without debate. Certain paths feel closed without explanation. Other paths feel open, long before evidence appears. The mind struggles with this at first. It wants reasons. It wants reassurance. It wants confirmation that can be defended. But intuition at this level does not argue. It moves. This is not recklessness. It is pattern recognition operating below conscious awareness. Your nervous system has integrated more information than language can process in real time. What once required analysis now registers as certainty. Quantum systems behave the same way. When coherence increases, the system stops sampling multiple possibilities. It collapses directly into the most stable state. That's what your intuition is doing. You're no longer oscillating between options. You're selecting without hesitation. This is why overthinking feels unbearable now. Not because thinking is wrong, but because it's redundant. You've already arrived at the conclusion before the reasoning begins. This shift creates friction with the world around you. Others still explain their decisions, still justify their instincts, still talk themselves into and out of choices you don't set. And this can be misread as coldness, arrogance, or impulsivity. But the truth is simpler. You trust your internal signal because it has proven reliable. You have seen what happens when you ignore it. You have felt the cost of overriding it, and you've experienced the ease that comes from obeying it. This doesn't mean intuition is always comfortable. Sometimes it tells you to walk away. Sometimes it closes doors you wanted to keep open. Sometimes it strips you of options you were emotionally attached to. But it is consistent, and consistency builds trust. This is also why advice has lost its influence. Not because you believe you know everything, but because advice operates at a slower resolution. By the time someone else understands your situation, you've already moved beyond it. This doesn't isolate you. It clarifies you. You stop outsourcing authority. You stop seeking consensus. You stop delaying action for validation. Your relationship with uncertainty changes as well. You said not afraid of not knowing the outcome. You said uncomfortable with ignoring direction. There is a difference. The mind fears uncertainty because it wants control. Intuition accepts uncertainty because it recognizes trajectory. You don't need to see the whole path. You only need to know the next step. And that step is always clear. When intuition operates at this level, life becomes quieter. Fewer decisions feel heavy. Fewer choices feel confusing. Fewer outcomes feel surprising. Not because everything is predictable, but because everything feels internally aligned. This is why returning to purely rational decision-making feels impossible. Not because logic is wrong, but because its sets no longer primary. You didn't abandon reason. You placed it in its proper position, not a master, as a tool. And once intuition leads, the system moves with less resistance. That sips when things stop feeling forced. That sips when timing feels natural. That's when life starts responding faster than thought, not because you controlling reality, but because you finally listening to it. 9. You can go back because the system withdrew support. At some point after the shift, you tried to return. Not dramatically, not consciously. You revisited old thoughts, old behaviors, old identities that once felt familiar and safe, and something was wrong. The effort felt heavy. The motivation felt artificial. The energy simply wasn't set there. This is where many people misinterpret what's happening. They think they've lost discipline. They think they're tired. They think they've become lazy or disconnected. But what actually happened is far more fundamental. In quantum systems, states persist only while they are reinforced. The system stopped supplying energy to outdated patterns. Once reinforcement is removed, the state doesn't fight to exist. It dissolves. That's what you are experiencing. You can still remember who you were. You can still mimic old behaviors. But the internal reward mechanism is gone. No emotional return. No sense of purpose. No internal confirmation. This isn't punishment. It's efficiency. The system doesn't waste energy sustaining identities that no longer contribute to coherence. That's why going back feels exhausting rather than comforting. Why old escapes no longer distract. Why old ambitions no longer motivate. It's not that those things are bad. These were just unfunded. This is also why forcing yourself forward in old ways doesn't work anymore. Willpower fails. Motivation fades. Discipline collapses. Not because you became weak, but because effort cannot override structural withdrawal. You're trying to operate machinery that has been decommissioned. And here sits the crucial part most people miss. The more you push, the more resistance you feel. The system does not explain this withdrawal. It doesn't just announce it. It doesn't just warn you. It simply stops responding. That silence is not emptiness. It's just direction. The discomfort you feel when trying to go back is not a flaw. It sets feedback. Your body, mind, and attention are no longer aligned with those trajectories. They cannot be powered anymore. This is why new paths feel lighter, even when they're uncertain. Why unfamiliar directions feel calm, even when they lack guarantees. Energy follows alignment, not familiarity. Once this shift occurs, nostalgia becomes deceptive. You remember how things felt, but you cannot recreate the feeling itself. That feeling belonged to a different configuration of you. Trying to reclaim it is like trying to access a closed system with outdated credentials. The system doesn't reject you. It doesn't recognize the request. And that's the finality people struggle to accept. You can revisit the past mentally. You can analyze it. You can talk about it, but you cannot live there again. Not because you are forbidden, but because the infrastructure is gone. It saps a description. This is why the phrase, "you can't go back," feels so absolute. It sets, not a warning. There is no path backward, because there is no energy there. The system already moved on. And once support is withdrawn, adaptation is not optional. It's inevitable. You either follow the energy forward, or you exhaust yourself trying to animate something that no longer exists. The moment you stop fighting this, something stabilizes. Relief replaces effort. Clarity replaces force. You realize you weren't set being blocked. You were being redirected. And that redirection is irreversible, because the system only removes support when it has already confirmed that the previous version of you is no longer viable. That is not failure. That is completion. But 10. Your desires changed because your position changed. One of the quietest but most disorienting effects of the shift is this. You no longer want what you used to want. Not in a dramatic way. Not with disgust or rejection. Just with an absence of pull. Goals that once energized you now feel distant. Validation that once mattered now barely registers. Achievements that once felt urgent now feel optional. At first, this feels like loss. People assume they've lost ambition. They worry they've become indifferent. They fear they're wasting potential. But desire doesn't disappear without cause. It updates. Desire is not a moral signal. It's a positional signal. In every system, what you want depends on where you are. Before the shift, desire was driven by lack. When position changes, desire must change with it, or the system breaks. By comparison, by the need to become something you weren't set yet. And when lack dissolves, desire stops shouting. After the shift, that internal gap closed. This is why chasing feels wrong now, why striving feels noisy, why ambition feels strangely hollow. You're no longer being pulled forward by incompleteness. You are not unmotivated. The world doesn't teach this distinction. It equates wanting less with becoming less. It assumes hunger is the engine of value. But hunger is only necessary when alignment is missing. When coherence is present, desire becomes selective. You want fewer, cleaner signals. You don't want more things. You don't chase outcomes. You crave clarity. You don't crave stimulation. They still measure success by accumulation. This shift confuses others. You care about trajectory, by visibility. You measure it by friction, by momentum. If something requires constant force, you lose interest. If something demands performance over truth, you walk away. If something drains coherence, you disengage. This isn't apathy. It saps precision. Your nervous system now rejects desires that don't match your position. This is also why impatience with misaligned goals appears. You can still pursue things, but only when they feel internally funded. Money alone doesn't motivate. External incentives no longer work. Recognition doesn't excite. Pressure doesn't push. Only resonance moves you now. This creates a dangerous temptation to judge yourself by old standards, to compare current calm with past hunger, to mistake stillness for stagnation. But stillness at this stage is not absence of movement. It's absence of waste. You are no longer scattering energy across possibilities that don't matter. You are conserving it for paths that do. And here rests the part that feels unsettling at first. You may not yet know what you want instead. That doesn't mean something is missing. It means the system is waiting for the next alignment to reveal itself, not to be forced. Desire no longer leads. It follows. It emerges once direction stabilizes. That's why rushing to replace old wants feels wrong. Why forcing passion feels artificial. Why copying others' espaced goals feels empty. Your desires didn't shrink. And once refinement completes, what you move toward will feel inevitable, not urgent. They refined, effortless, not exciting, quiet, but undeniable. This is when ambition returns in a different form. Not as hunger, but as commitment, not as chasing, but as alignment in motion. And when that happens, you once need motivation, because desire will no longer be asking you to become someone else. It will be asking you to express who you already are. 11. Most people won't recognize you anymore. One of the most unsettling realizations after the shift is not internal. It's relational. People who once knew you well now seem slightly misaligned with you. Not distant in an obvious way, not hostile, just off. Responses arrive, but they don't land. Conversations feel strangely out of phase. This isn't set because you changed dramatically. Recognition exists, but it sits incomplete. It's because they're interacting with a memory of you. Most relationships are built on continuity of identity. People don't relate to who you are. They relate to who you were the last time the bond stabilized. When identity updates without external announcement, recognition lags behind. You don't look different. You don't sound different. But the internal reference point others use to interpret you no longer matches the signal you're sending. This creates subtle tension. They may feel uncomfortable without knowing what shifted. They may sense distance without understanding why. They may attempt to re-anchor you in old roles through jokes, expectations, or reminders of who you used to be. Not out of malice, out of orientation. Their nervous system is trying to stabilize the relationship by restoring a familiar version of you. But that version is no longer accessible. This is why explaining yourself feels useless. Language can repair a mismatch of states. You can describe your changes perfectly and still not be seen. Because recognition doesn't happen at the level of information. It happens at the level of resonance. And resonance cannot be negotiated. This is also why you stop defending yourself. Not because you don't care, but because defense assumes there is something to preserve. There isn't. You are no longer protecting an identity. This creates a quiet grief. You are inhabiting one. Not the grief of loss, but the grief of asymmetry. You still recognize others. You still understand them, but they no longer fully recognize you. That imbalance can feel isolating, but it's not permanent. It's transitional. Relationships either recalibrate or dissolve. Some people gradually update their perception of you. They adapt to the new signal. They learn how to relate without forcing the past. Others don't. They resist the change. They cling to memory. They experience your presence as absence. This is not rejection. It's timeline divergence. Two paths that once ran parallel now move at different resolutions. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They try to shrink themselves to be recognized again. They soften their edges. They perform familiarity to reduce discomfort. But that never works. Because recognition gained through self-reduction comes at the cost of coherence. And coherence is non-negotiable now. You may notice that silence feels easier than explanation. This isn't set coldness. Distance feels kinder than forced closeness. Boundaries form naturally without effort. You are allowing others to remain where they are, without dragging them forward or pulling yourself back. It sets respect for reality. This stage feels lonely because the number of people who can see you clearly narrows, but clarity increases. When recognition returns, it comes differently. Fewer people, less intensity, more accuracy, no projection.